very allows
I had been headbutting some of these issues that somehow weren't being attended to in the ways in which people were technically progressing. And that was where I met Bernd, and he was also there. And we formed this project called the Framework for Research, Responsible Research and Innovation in ICT. And the project itself did quite a lot in the 3 years that it was running. We fostered a network of researchers, so that was part of our brief, was to sort of seed things, seed people around. This isn't something that can be prescriptive. We had to bring the community on board with us. Part of that workshop, that original workshop, was about seeing how many people would really be engaged in this. Did they also come across these things? Were they also, I mean, those of you who work with, you know that you kind of butt against very technical, and people, they have their mindset, they have what they want to do, they have their goals and aspirations, and you're bringing in something else they have to think about, and it's hard. It's hard. So it was about bringing the community with us, not putting down anything that we, sort of being prescriptive about it, but also, a good piece of action research. How can we get from them also what they want and what they need, and frame it in some way that's a good piece of or a moving forward piece of research. And we ran a lot of workshops. We developed an observatory, which is an amazing, I think, piece of research now, because we also had some funding to fund bits of what ethics and ICT, and we put out calls for research, and that is all hosted on the observatory. The website is there. We conducted a landscape study, which I'll tell you about just very briefly in a minute. That was really to find out what different stakeholders felt about responsible research and innovation, or really what kinds of things they bumped up against in terms of ethics. And the whole time we've been developing this framework and we're still continuing to develop it. So the landscape study was quite interesting in the sense that we interviewed a whole cross-section of the ICT community, and the ICT community within EPSRC is quite constrained, but it has, obviously it's made up of academics, the EPSRC portfolio managers, civil society organisations, different kinds of professional organisations, ACM, BCS, so forth, industry. And we asked them what they thought researchers' current perceptions of responsible research and innovation in ICT might be. And this was done through a sort of grounded theory approach, but very much kind of action research. And we did a sort of thematic analysis on those issues. And I just want to give you a flavour of the types of things that people came up with, because it's really quite interesting. So obviously for many of them, they didn't frame these things in terms of RRI, but they had varying kinds of understandings of who they might be responsible to. They're responsible to themselves, to their participants, to a project, to their institutions, to the public. But most of all, what came through was they felt there was no such thing as an unethical scientist. So if we read, if you look at one of the fragments, I don't think I've come across an unethical scientist. If a problem occurs, it's maybe that they just haven't considered the true implications of where there could be problems down the line. I think it's more that it hasn't occurred to them rather than they've considered it and they've decided to go for it, or go with it for the hell of it anyway. So this kind of idea that there can't be a sort of unethical scientist, and that ethics itself resides in their methodology and research, as long as you have done the methodology correctly. When you do experiments, you make sure you do them correctly. They're reproducible, you present exactly what you've done honestly and fairly, and you do comparisons to some other work, and you do them honestly and fairly. So that seemed to be the kind of limit of what they thought responsible research and innovation was about. There was an appreciation that you went beyond that. And at the end, when they were actually pushed, they said, well, nobody's actually ever asked us to go beyond this. So it was a kind of a thing in transition. And I think now they're very much beginning to appreciate that. Another part of this was that technology itself is seen to be somehow value-free or agnostic. There's very much the division between basic research and applied research. The people who are doing basic research, or the sort of things that the researchers told us that made us start to think, well, there's something about ICT that's quite different, and if you take it in combination, all the things they've told us, then perhaps there's something about this as well that we can reflect in the framework. And the first thing is really the speed of innovation. This is quite interesting. The rhythm of what happens in ICT. You can develop an app somewhere in a garage tonight, and it can go viral tomorrow, and it can have consequences and impacts, and it doesn't go through any formal procedures in ways that other types of perhaps sciences have much more kind of stricter procedures for that. So the speed of innovation is one. The kinds of technologies that we use, technology can be used in any number of different ways, in a wide variety of applications, and that makes it almost impossible to think about it makes it impossible to think about how the uses and misuses how you can predict those. And that's complicated even more by the fact that these new devices get interlinked with other devices in lots of different ways. So how we can start to think through that, and that's what we mean by logical malleability, is quite problematic. It's pervasive, Bernd has already said, it's everywhere, you can't escape it now, and it only sees we're going to do that in the future. Algorithms, and we were talking about algorithms earlier, this notion of embedded algorithms on top of that, embedded into physical things, as for example, management systems in cars, washing machines, it's everywhere, and how these things are starting to become more and more sophisticated with machine learning, etc. These things are becoming so much more, they shape the way we start to think and the way we start to live. They mediate our personal interactions in ways that are so intimate to us now that we don't even think about it anymore. They're just there, and these organizations that build these things, they can shape and track the way we use them in many different ways. They can silently be profiling us, as you know, in ways that we don't have any control over us, and they shape our experience and our opportunities. And finally, there's the problem of many hands, that these technical activities in organizations, well, they're kind of split up between lots of different people. So trying to track what's happening is really hard. It is partly related to this notion of basic research and applied research, but then you've got the whole product chain as well. So how do you start to track who's responsible for what, who's accountable for what? Especially in organizations and in industry where people move and change and shift so quickly. So at this point, I just want to show you a little video, which is something that we did as part of this project in order to engage people who don't have a technical background as well, to tell you what RRI is. We've chosen a particular, part of the problem with ICT is it's so vast, it's so huge, it could be anything. And we chose effective computing as one example, but really, this is about the framework. It could be any other type of technology. And I'll play this now. Sound, yes, you're correct. Sound, well done. Sound.
The Framework for Responsible Research and Innovation in ICT Project, FRICT. Imagine interacting with your very own robot. You're preparing breakfast in the kitchen one morning, and in comes the robot. Good morning, it says with a smile. Morning, you say grumpily. It looks at your face, tunes into the tone of your voice, notices smoke rising above the stove, and hears you slam a pot into the sink. Quickly, the robot works out that you are not having a good morning at all. Because this robot is an emotionally aware robot, it can change its behavior according to what it notices about you. It can guess your mood from your posture, your tone of voice, the color of your face, your heart rate or breathing pattern. The information helps it interact with you in a more natural way. So if you're having a bad morning, it can avoid upsetting you further and can even try to make you feel better. This kind of robot is an example of an effective device. Effective devices are designed to perceive, interpret, or express emotions like we humans do. But while there are benefits to this kind of technology, there are serious considerations too. Like, where does the robot store your emotional profile? And who has access to it? Insurance companies? Drug companies? Future employers? And what if the robot becomes so good at expressing and responding to human emotions that it confuses people? What if people begin to treat the robot like it's a fellow person? And how would we feel if these systems misinterpreted our behaviors? Would we feel deceived? How would this affect our sense of control over the technologies that play a part in our daily lives? Our work explores how we can make innovations in digital technologies that are mindful of the consequences for individuals and society. To do this, designers of technology should make their best efforts to anticipate the consequences of their innovations, reflect upon the problem they're trying to solve, engage with all those who have an interest or are affected by the innovation, and act to ensure the innovation is socially desirable. By studying the positive and negative impacts of computing devices and factoring them into the design process for future innovations, research communities become more accountable both to those that fund their work and to the public in general.
Okay, so what we did was we built on an existing framework, the area framework, a kind of mnemonic that was developed initially by Jack Stilgo, Richard Owen and Phil McNaughton, and we shaped it specifically for ICT. And in that small kind of, part of RRI is about engaging the public, about engaging people, so that they also can have a say in what is happening. And so it has to also be expressed quite simply. And that's why, we did that sort of animation. But the area framework, the mnemonic, invites people to really start thinking about ways in which you can start to anticipate, really anticipate and describe. How do you describe, how do you analyze the impacts that might arise from the technology that you're developing? Then you start to reflect. I mean, very often in technology, people are just driving through. There's no time put into the process for reflection, reflecting on the purposes of and the motivations for what you're doing and the potential implications of what you're actually doing. And then when you've reflected, you start to engage. You start to think about the other stakeholders around you. Who do I need to engage in this? Who do I need to start talking to about this? Who can give me some valuable information about what we're doing here? How do you open that up? All the methods that you need to as well. And then acting on that. So it's a kind of full circle. So it's not just getting all that information, but you might actually have to change your original project objectives. You might have to change the whole thing if it doesn't, the trajectory of the research itself might change. On top of that, we introduced this thing called the 4 Ps, which is very much about process, for example. Process is one that we know quite well, and it's very familiar to the researchers about the research methodology. What are the activities that we should go through? How do we do data collection? We know all about that. But then there's product as well, something that people don't think about very much. What is the product of this, of your particular research? What's the consequences of the use of that product and the misuse of that product? What impact is it going to have on the social environment? We rarely really think through those sorts of things. What's the purpose? Often we don't think about that over and above a kind of financial one or an economical one. We don't think about why that research is undertaken at all. And people, because they're at the heart of this and they need to be explicitly considered in all of it. So we then, yes. We've then put this whole thing into a table. So we're trying to make something understandable and immediately kind of visible and condensed so that people can look at it and use it as some kind of effective tool. And it's a big ask here because it's quite broad in and of itself. So these things will have to be embedded into different types of situations and contexts. And it's important, again, it's important also to understand that this is a kind of experiment. This is an emerging thing. This is not something that we are prescribing in any way. This will be tailored and shaped according to the context in which you use it. So how might something like this work in practice? So if we take our robot example, from our scenario in the film, the robot detects our emotions. It's able to reflect, to react in a kind of effective manner. It's trying to cheer us up when we're grumpy in the morning. So if we take our first question, a researcher or a developer might look to these questions early on in the development process. And here one question might be if the innovation is actually socially desirable, thinking about what the certain consequences might be. So here you might start to think about, well, issues of trust. They might compete here with the interactions of the robot. The interaction might seem more natural. It might give a much richer experience, which is what we're all after, a much more kind of a richer and more fluid and seamless experience. But then you might have feelings of being manipulated or deceived in this particular, that example, that's the one that we show. If you take that now and put it into a care home, for example, where they're predicting that robots will be used excessively in the future, what are the implications that we then think about for our cultural duty of care, our cultural duty of compassion and values of companionship in that particular environment? We just have to start thinking about what Facebook might have done to the concept of friend in that environment, to start thinking through what might happen to care. So that opens up a space to start thinking about those kinds of issues. And in terms of the actual features of ICT, the pervasiveness, the ubiquity of it again. So this isn't just those issues out there, it's also about you as the researcher. These things are both, they reflect each other. It's not just the outside obligations, it's the obligations that you have to yourself as well. I, as a researcher in the field of robotics, for example, I might ask myself, how do these things affect me? I just do research in the lab. I'm focusing on performance, how far my robot can throw a ball, how much I can lift, how my robot can lift an old person or an aging person. This versus the fact that very soon that robot's going to be a product in the market, if we think about the Japanese pepper robot, for example. So how can I, and why should I, have responsibility for what others do when that is turned into a product? And we don't have an answer for that. You know, this is the space that we're working in, if we can even indeed answer that sort of question. What we've tried to do with this framework is really to stimulate that type of questioning for researchers, for innovators, so that they can draw on those questions, both early upstream activities where those innovations are conceived, and also downstream activities where they're turned into products. So that is what you see in front of you with that particular framework. It's still at early days, we're still trying to refine it. It will be refined as it goes on. But I think that's something that we really have to do this and try to find some kind of end-to-end. It's not just about research, it's the whole thing that has turned from the research into a product, and even after that as well. So with this, I think we wanted to then ask you to go back to the heart link and see if it made any difference.
Before we do that, are there any questions or comments on anything either was said or the framework?
Not one.
Get this taken up. Let's assume that you can take it to the level at which it's useful. Forgive me if you think you already have. Why would a robot engineer in Japan pick this up?
So one of the challenges is also, and the things that I didn't kind of bring out, was to make this a resource for creativity, which it is. It's not a barrier. When you've started to do a lot of social research, which I have, in the ways in which understanding how people interact can be a resource for informing design, this can also be. We can start to think through much cleverer ways and much more sensitive ways of designing particular types of applications. So it's a challenge for design. It's a resource of creativity. That's why we pick it up. Culturally, of course, there's huge issues there, because what we may decide isn't morally acceptable or ethically acceptable. Other cultures may not feel in the same way. So globally, there's a kind of big... Or socially desirable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't have to go as far as Japan.
Well,
the
of course,
American view of privacy, for instance, is significantly different.
yeah.
Well, within Europe, you have
Which
this.
is a needed, sorry.
No, yeah, I would agree. There are lots of different, culturally different views of what is desirable, what is an ethical issue, how to address them. And I think Marina has made it very clear that we're not in the business of telling you what to do. And what this is about is trying to ask intelligent questions that help us understand better what we're doing and how we're doing it and why we're doing it.
I come from the market.
You come from where, sorry?
I come from the market environment. I'm not an academic, so I deal every day with startups in Internet of Things, and many of the innovation we are seeing, they are coming out not from university. So how do you plan? I mean, before that, this tool is extremely valuable for the companies I see around me every day, if they use it. But how do you plan to communicate this community, this sort of things? Because when you engage with academia, with the research, with the academia, but there is an incredible need of an approach like that to connected devices startup, wearable devices startup. I mean, the example on HeartLink, I don't know, did they use your framework or not?
Well, the HeartLink actually comes, the case study comes from the case studies that we have in our observatory. So this is something that somebody who worked on the project wrote up as an example of what they think is worth pursuing. But I think the question, how do we communicate this to industry, is a very good one. I think partly we've tried to engage with industry from the outset. So we had the companies we saw at the beginning, Microsoft, Google, BT, some big ones in there. There are also activities that try to consider the whole question of responsible innovation in industry. So there's another project which we did talk about, which is called Responsible Industry, where we specifically look at how that could be done. And I think the answer, well, the direction in which the answer is probably going to go is we have to make sure that it links with things that they understand and that are important to them. So, for example, things like the corporate social responsibility discourse. That's something that makes sense to a lot of companies, at least the big companies, where you can start and say, well, if you want to be socially responsible, then it's not good enough to just give donations to the kids, but you actually have to integrate this into your research. Now, how you deal with startups, that's a very different question, and I'm not sure I have a good answer to that, because they are, of course, much more driven by immediate needs to create a profit. They're much smaller, they haven't got the reflective capabilities and the slack in the system to think about fundamental questions. So.
And also another one, what you highlight here implies multidisciplinary approach to product development. Am I right?
Yes.
And particularly in the Internet of Things, the connected devices is fundamental. I mean, how do you, to enable a multidisciplinary approach in a product-driven company, so I'm always talking about companies, a lot of investment. How do you, I want to go to the point that this is very interesting, but probably it's quite difficult to implement in the marketplace.
That's probably true, and I think that's where we have to hone in on the message that this is a benefit for companies. So by doing this, you understand better what society wants, what your market wants, and if you ignore your market, well, you do that every parallel anyway. And I think another way of framing it would be as a risk management approach. So this had to scan the horizon in a way that is sensitive to things that normal risk management probably wouldn't. I know Don is not like that, as you said, still the idea. But I think that, so there are different strategies of communicating this, which we have to employ, and which we're trying to engage with varying degrees of success.
I mean, the larger companies are extremely interested in this, and Bernd is right. They're very kind of.
I'm not worried about that.
I don't know what the motivations are, but they're very interested in this. And as Bernd pointed out, it's the smaller companies who are also, it's not that they're not, it's just they don't have the resources to deal with this. That might be something that we could look at in the future about how the more this kind of thing is refined. I take your point on interdisciplinarity.
I'm not worried about Google. I don't think that is come out. I'm worried about the small size innovator.
And I would assume
people like this very excited about technology, but that's not the question.
Yeah.
It's idea along those lines.
So I guess it would be interesting to explore whether this sort of thinking can be integrated into venture capital funding. That might be a mechanism whereby you could reach a particular type of audience. How to do that? I guess it probably would be possible, but I can't tell you how. Could we, before we go into general discussion, could we ask you to come back to the HeartLink study and do the second iteration of that? Just spend a couple of minutes.
Do you have any questions?
Oh, Don.
Yes, I do.
Oh.
Of course he does.
I was wondering if you have said to these folks that the research has shown that ethics is in fact they're wiggling the camera. That ethics is in fact a profit-making element for a corporation, that it's those companies, research has shown that those companies which are more ethical and publicly known as that actually have a higher profitability, and use that as a motivator for ethics.
That's interesting.
Yes.
I was just wondering if you've used that data.
No, I didn't know that data actually, personally. I don't know if you did.
Well, it leads to old, long-standing business ethics debate about whether ethics that makes money is actually ethics. No, but I think it's part of this sort of argumentative strategy that could be used. And I've been, last week, 2 weeks ago, I was at an event organized with the Information Economy Council that Marina should go to, but didn't, so I went. And the interesting thing there was that there was a very strong feeling in the room, and this was mostly industry people saying that they are very worried about the lack of trust or the loss of trust by customers. partly that was linked to Snowden, but generally lots of privacy violations that everybody's aware now. And the company said, well, we need to be perceived to be ethical, otherwise we're going to lose even more business. And I guess that's a very similar argument to the one that you just made it on.
That was the week last Thursday.
The trust argument is one of the issues. We have a large selling company called Target in the United States, which had a massive data breach. And people stopped using their credit cards and essentially stopped buying there, and it suffered a lot financially. But I'm talking about more than just the issue of trust. Employees like working for an ethical company that tries to do the right thing. It helps in recruitment. It helps in retaining employees. So there's a little bit more beyond the trust stuff. Yep. And there is some data, some of this data helps motivate companies when they say, well, we haven't got time to be ethical. We have to get this product there because it's important for the bottom line. And so this is a way of making ethics meet the bottom line argument.
Yeah. Yes. Now, I'm aware of a project where people try to actually quantify ethics in euros. And again, if it works, it's certainly interesting in terms of having something to talk about and raising interest. Whether it's good philosophy is a different question. Okay, good. Maybe you have taken the opportunity.
Yeah, we've got about 5 more minutes.
Okay, so if you could spend a minute and a half on that, just saying something on the second page, whether anything we've said has now given you additional insights into how to think about the hard link problem or project. Whether it's a problem, different question.
Participants removed you.
Yeah, the
So there's messages.
internet connection down went down for a few moments. Switched being used for slides to pick it up web cameras, so I got to switch back. This has not gone smoothly from a technical point of view.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Okay, thank you very much for that. If you're willing to share your insights with that later on, we very much appreciate if you could give us the sheets. This is, of course, it hasn't got your name on it, so it's completely anonymous. We just check the ink color, so we know who you are. Before we finish, this is the observatory we've talked about. So it's a website which is very much a bottom-up built system that is supposed to provide support for people, particularly the UK ICT research community, to deal with the sort of issues we've talked about. The most, well, that's the most interesting bit, I don't know, but the aspect of it where we have all the resources is here, and these are ordered by different types of categories. One of them is case studies. This is where we have most, because we had several calls for case studies where people were invited to submit to them. And that's also where, somewhere in here, you can also find the hard link case that we've introduced to you today. So the idea is that this gives you insights into possible ethical issues, possible solutions, definitions. And this is something where people dealing with this sort of question can hopefully find inspiration, and at some point also community connections to find people with whom they can discuss this sort of question.
I think one of the interesting things also is that we had far more people sending us proposals that we could possibly fund. I mean, there's a huge appetite out there for this now, for the researchers and their experiences, and they've got nowhere to put it. They've got no. So it's quite interesting.
Okay, so that concludes us for today.
Thank you very much. From the discussions that were coming through, both on the Heart Link and on the framework and what we talked about from the feedback from our audience, and I think it has got everybody thinking, but unresolved.
Can we get a copy of the slide?
The slide deck, yes, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, thank you both very much indeed for that. So, and if you haven't seen or had a look through September's IT now,
It's in there.
It is in there. It is in there. Yeah. With other things about ethics as well. Okay, now I'm going to move on quickly to